Did anyone else see that film Now You See Me in 2013? Yeah, you all loved it, I know. Whereas I came out feeling like my intelligence had been somewhat insulted. The episode of Doctor Who, Time Heist, seems to have taken some inspiration from this film, and I would assume it's because of its acclaimed popularity that they feel the need to make an episode surrounding a person who has to steal from a bank without knowing why or how they got to the bank in the first place. Despite Doctor Who isn't a Hollywood shit stain like Now You See Me, this episode was more watchable. However, that is not to say it is without its flaws either. So let's cut to the chase and analyse some shits and giggles displayed in this episode. The Doctor begins the episode by advertising all the weird and wonderful places he could take Clara to, but will probably never visit until CGI is cheaper and less time consuming. We once again see Clara acting like she's too busy to be bothered with the Doctor on a frequent basis, which I can see positive and negative aspects to. Firstly, I can understand why she'd want to be back on Earth, as travelling with the Doctor is a somewhat stressful and frightening experience in itself, and a few homesick comforts may be just the right medicine for any of the Doctor's companions. However, Clara seems to be doing it more frequently than the other companions, and in a more obnoxious way, and really makes me look forward to seeing her leave us at the end of this series.
Rid the universe of your filth! Why don't you just die?
The Doctor pulls a funny one out of the bag about Clara wearing high heels, and then she leaves for her date. That is until the TARDIS phone rings and they appear in a room with a cyborg and a shapeshifter. They realise their memories have been wiped, and then the briefcase from Pulp Fiction opens up. The characters have their task, but before they can even think about it, security comes banging on the door with this threat.
Please stand away from the door. We do not wish to hurt you before incineration.
This line doesn't quite make sense to me, because regardless of how humane you're going to kill the people, they're still going to go livid knowing that they're going to die. You'd have thought if the people who were in the room were trespassing the most secure bank ever, then the soldiers wouldn't give a shit and just barge right in, disintegrating them before they even have the chance to escape. I think it's just dramatic convenience so we can have that weird glass-breaking transition into the next scene, without knowing how the Doctor and co escape. So we are introduced to Mrs. Delphox, who is... Wait a minute, isn't Delphox a Pokemon? Oh my fucking god, they're even spelt the same! Anyway, the soldiers lose their memories as if they're smoking weed or something, and then Mrs. Mozilla Firefox then breathes into a locked door to open it. This is a pretty neat method of identification, despite the fact that it must be freezing cold in her room in order for us to see her breath. I mean, it's a nice change from all that eye recognition stuff we see in spy movies.
Edna mode.
However, I would like to see if our breath does actually have any of our DNA in it. Considering I thought it was just carbon dioxide, let me know in the fucking comments, you slats! I have to say, the spy crime style of filming this episode is really quite effective. Like the slow-mo shots, the sped up tracking, I don't feel like I'm watching Doctor Who, I feel like I'm watching James Bond or something. This style is used really nicely to introduce one of the coolest monsters this show has come up with in a while, called the Teller. It has made such an intimidating impression on the scene, and even the Doctor doesn't know what it is. I have a feeling this monster's going to make quite an impression by this point. Oh my god, it does. The monster literally squashes his victim's brains into liquid and sucks it out of him telepathically. I have a little nag in the final shot that the victim's hands are still on his head, despite that part of his head that his hands are laid on has now been completely flattened. What also confuses me is how these people are actually still alive, despite their brains are completely gone, which, without the brain, you have nothing telling you that your heart needs to keep beating or your lungs to keep breathing. As the group enter a safety deposit box room, the bank voice can be heard, which, to any of you who have played the Stanley Parable, is the voice of the narrator in that game. It's a shame I don't feel like I'm being talked to directly by the voice of the bank, but it's nice to know that his career as a voice actor is progressing smoothly. We find out about Mrs. Delta Foxtrot having a manager who she fears, and the bomb blows up a hole in the floor like a portal gun that replaces the wall soon after it's been destroyed. The soldiers come in and find that there's nothing there. I think it would have been a better idea to make them armoured and more suited for battle. At the moment they just look like British military soldiers of the early 21st century, especially considering they're guarding the greatest bank in the... Budget! 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 So we find the humans with soup for brains are still kept prisoners, and the gang find themselves in the room with the Teller. Things get really intense in this scene as we find that the teller has the ability to control people's movement as well as their brains. Sabre gets trapped, and we have the most time-consuming cry for help I've ever heard.
Sabra!
What do I do? How can I get away?
It's running through your brain. It's tasting all the secrets stashed inside. Any moment now, it will finish its sweep and start feasting on what's left.
What, and then I become one of those things we saw sitting in a cage?
Yes.
I think you could have helped her just by pulling her towards the shaft instead of explaining what will happen to her if she doesn't move, which I would assume she already knows. She teleports away for later use in the episode though, and the characters move on rather emotionally. The teller is then released into the psychedelic multicoloured tunnels, hunting down the Doctor and Clara. It is nice to know that for some reason the editors left this shot of Clara smiling as if she didn't realise the camera was rolling.
Rid the universe of your filth!
Whilst the cyborg tries to open up the vault, I now realise that the voice of Kevin Brighting is not very well suited for the bank. He sounds almost cheerful at everything he does, regardless of how dangerous or high priority the announcement may be. The Doctor then repeats himself in Clara's mind, but she can't help but feel the need to think about something. The teller locks her in place and the cyborg saves her. All the work he did on unlocking the vault was for nothing, and a solar storm begins. There are flashing lights coming from absolutely nowhere logical in the tunnels, and the door opens. You'd have thought the Doctor's whole speech about needing something logical to open the door might remind the lighting crew that you need to think logically about where the light sources may be coming from. Okay, so it can't be lightning because there are no windows. The flashes seem to be coming from behind them, but the lights on the ceiling can't make light that bright, or surely they would break. The computer may spark, but that's to their left. The flashing light seems to be coming from the walls and the ceiling, giving this weirdly and anticlimactically yet suspenseful effect. I'm probably once again overthinking this, but I can't quite figure out where the lighting is coming from. If you have an answer, send me a Snapchat! Once they're in the vault, they find all the dead people's desired objects. However, the Doctor and Clara make their way towards the private vault, only to be captured by the teller. They start to get manhandled by the two guards, only to find they are actually Sabre and Psy in disguise. Clara then makes the most awkward hug in human history. I want to touch you again. So they make their way to the private vault, and it's revealed that the boss of the bank uses clones to run the whole administration. I'm not sure if this is just so they can all think in the same positive attitude that she does, because they're all clones. However, surely then they're all just going to behave like they're the manager of the entire complex and not understand the subsection they have been given to work on. That's kind of what defines a clone, that's what I thought. The Doctor then figures out that he's the architect all along, and we see this shot of the solar storm sweeping over the planet. I know solar flares can be a somewhat inconvenience on our home planet, but it confuses me on the highest degree as to whose decision it was to put the greatest bank in the galaxy on a planet that could melt due to a solar storm any second. I haven't got the astronomical knowledge to tell you the likelihood or frequency of solar storms in general, but to me it's becoming clearer that this solar storm is just a plot device to create a problem for Karabraxos to send the Doctor on his mission in the first place. The last few minutes once again give us the old memory jog of fitting in all the bits of information that were missing in the first place, and find that the last regret that the Doctor was talking about was Karabraxos' imprisonment of the other teller. Something I thought about was that her need to replace her clones is simple and something she does at the click of her fingers, but the tellers, her only means of hardened security at the bank, are not disposable. Despite she has another one spare, it just shows the lengths that she would go to keep her money safe, even if somehow the first teller were to be killed. The creatures are released into this awkwardly CG'd landscape that just makes my stomach churn. What makes my stomach feel even worse is the oddly placed Chinese food that all the characters are eating when they get back into the TARDIS, and their awkward farewells. They're each individually dropped off, and these really unnecessarily awkward scenes of the characters leaving the TARDIS are shown. They should have just cut from the shot of the tellers being released to their home world, back to the Doctor delivering Clara back home. It's somewhat implying that we should give a shit about these characters that are only developed through their superhuman abilities and how many times Clara hugs them. I think I should also mention I missed the whole noise as the actual episode finishes. They're just making the Next Time trailer look more dramatic, despite I never want anything to do with the Next Time and just turn off the TV as soon as it appears. So, did it suck? Well, I guess the episode was alright. I mean, I would say this episode's probably a 7 out of 10 because its intriguing story and awesome monster keep the episode afloat, but the silliness that sometimes comes into play is where the points begin to get deducted. When will they learn?